Section 9.3, Confidence and Prediction Intervals, video number 1. So far in this chapter, we have talked about some inferences for regression, where we estimated slope, tested whether or not slope was 0, tested whether or not correlation was 0. And we also performed an analysis of variance on a regression. Sorry, my setup here is acting a little bit goofy. Where we tested the hypothesis whether or not a model is effective by doing an analysis of variance on the model. And in this third and final section in Chapter 9, we're going to look at something called confidence and prediction intervals. Now, we've seen confidence intervals before, but what's a prediction interval and how is it different from a confidence interval? Well, let's start by defining what each one is. If you have a regression, a simple regression model, and remember, simple just means one explanatory, one response. In Chapter 10, we want to change it to multiple explanatory variables. But for a specific value, and we're going to call it x star, of the explanatory variable in a simple regression model, we can build two types of intervals. One is called a confidence interval for a mean response. And that's an interval which has a given chance, so the confidence level, such as 95% chance, an interval which has a given chance of capturing the mean response for all elements of a population where the predictor value is x star. For example, let's talk about the model that we saw in previous videos where we were attempting to predict the amount of tip on a bill based on what the bill amount was at a restaurant. So bill was the explanatory variable or the predictor, and tip was the response variable. What a confidence interval for a mean response is we would take a certain value of the bill, for example, let's say a bill of $40, and we would construct an interval to try to capture the mean tip amount when the bill is $40 for an entire population. Emphasis on the word mean. Now, what a prediction interval is for an individual response, it's an interval, and it still has a given chance of capturing something, but what it's trying to capture is the response value for a specific case in the population where the predictor value is some value called x star. For example, let's go back to the bill trying to predict the amount of the tip. For a prediction interval, what we would do is set up an interval to try to capture 95% of the response values in the population for when the bill is $40, as opposed to a confidence interval, which is attempting to capture the average of all the tips when the bill is $40. So again, the main difference between the two is a confidence interval is attempting to capture the average response value for a given explanatory value x star, and a prediction interval is trying to capture the actual response values themselves, 95% of them, 90% of them, however many, for a given value of the predictor. In this case, an interval trying to capture 95% of the different tip values for when a bill is equal to $40. In the next video, I will draw a scatter plot to try to illustrate the difference between a confidence interval and a prediction interval.